Hello, this is Anthony. Let's walk and talk. So in the last video, we talked about who you really are, and how the thoughts in your mind aren't you, along with how to have a better understanding and connect with who you are, the real version of you. If there are questions on that, then certainly feel free to reach out and I can expand on it. Sometimes when you're trying to keep your videos to a more concise time period for consumption, sometimes it just doesn't allow you to go into more depth. But I did try to explain some things to you about how to start to discover it. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the universal flow, and that is the flow of consciousness. How you, when you're connected to the self, how you can tap into that, and how it plays out amongst a myriad of things in life, not just from your ability to consciously speak and interact with those around you, but also, how it's used when you are connecting to the universe. Some people might call it the flow state. When you're in the flow state just isn't in speaking. It's in everything: music, athletics, everything that you do. You can connect to the flow state. And you see, I try to explain to people where the thing about it is the ego makes you think that the thoughts are you, and when the thoughts are you, what happens is you say, I came up with this idea. But from a macro perspective, we're starting to better understand that these thoughts aren't just your thoughts, they are universal thoughts, and then you just tune into the frequency of that thought. So to give you an example, I've had people ask me, you do these videos, how do you come up with all the content for these videos? And I give the easy answer, which is, I don't. You see, when I do these videos, I don't have handwritten notes. I don't have, any team or crew out here, giving me prompts. Essentially what happens is I just allow myself to connect to consciousness, and I know what it wants me to talk about, and then I just allow that information to flow through me. So there are very few times where I ever think about what I'm actually saying. It's just flowing through me, and I know what wants to come through. And so the best way to describe it is like I'll wake up and I'll have, let's say, meditation time, and I'll be doing some journaling. And then during that time, or even sometimes when I'm just out for a walk on the street or out in nature, something will just drop in out of nowhere. And it's very distinct. I know what the difference is between that and a thought. And so when I'm in some of those locations, if I have the ability, I'll just start up and do a video, or I will message myself as a reminder, and then I'll connect to that later for it to come out. And what's interesting is when you try to explain to somebody, it is definitely a flow state. It is something that wants to come out. It is not something that I go, oh, okay, yeah, that's great, and then I forget about it, because it doesn't. It'll come back at later dates, not again as a thought, more as a mental ping, for lack of a better word. You see, for many years, I lived in solitude in the mountains, and some would say I live the existence of a monk, and I connect with that. That's I don't like labels, but it's the closest label I could come up with. And in that time, I was able to, for the self, to master controlling the thoughts and the minds, and essentially where most people walk around and they have thoughts in their head all the time, I don't have that anymore, because I've trained my mind to not do that. As I exist in life and interact with people, do these things still occur? Of course, because you start connecting to others, and then the fragments of your ego begin to pop up, and then it starts. But that's the time where we talk about mindfulness, and we don't let it control us. We understand that it is us and we are in charge of it. So this flow state can happen in anything. I remember the former version of me was an athlete and played football. Played for a long time, and I can remember at times where, I would take the field and I would call a play, and then we would execute the play, and then afterwards, it was like flowing with life. Things were just happening. I had no thoughts. Everything was just strict reaction, and I've described this to some people in the past. It wasn't like playing a sport as much as it was almost like being a part of a big symphony, being a part of the flow of life. You weren't thinking about what you were doing. You were just flowing with it and doing it. That's why I think when I feel called to create content, buenos dias, I can connect to that more easily because it has the same type of feeling, where it's just a feeling of flow. There's not, I'm not directing this somewhere. I'm just allowing it to take me where I'm meant to go. And I think that's what makes life more exciting and interesting to me. Others would say, no, I like a plan. And I used to be the planner. But eventually, you understand when you begin to try to plan something, you're trying to curate a specific experience, and it requires everything around you to fall into place for that experience to try to meet what you expect it to meet. And the problem is, for many people, including my former self, was a perfectionist, you're never going to reach perfection. Everything around you in your environment is not going to completely agree with you and follow your plan. And so it creates issues, and those issues create chaos. Now, some people love to thrive in the chaos. They want the chaos. They don't know how to allow the nervous system to relax long enough to just be and then to enjoy the experience. So it's just a constant do, trying to overcome all of the external factors that are affecting your plan to make the plan perfect. Eventually, you get to a point, hopefully, at least I did, to where when you go through the experience, you have the awakening, you recognize I'm not really in control of anything other than my inner being. I'm not in control of anything external to me. I'm only in control of how I choose to be in the moment that the things around me are happening. And for me, I began to understand and feel that to be that flow state where I'm just existing and observing. Remember in the last video we talked about who you really are. You're your soul, and your soul is essentially the observer. Much like watching a video game on a television screen, the character in the game is going through a bunch of experiences and you're just watching it. And in watching it, you're trying to, in some ways, direct it, but that is much like your soul is. You see, we've talked about the fact that, as we talked in the past, about being a mind, body, and a soul, right? Your body is here, and your body is connected to all things around it here in the what some people would call the 3D or an Earth school. And in that, your body has its own programming, and that programming's from everything around you, past, present, and eventually future, because it's dictated by time. Then you have your thoughts. This is a mental universe as well, where you can think things, and when you think them, you can bring them into existence. And when you do that, you have to be very mindful of the thoughts, because if the thoughts are not good thoughts for you, again, I would always tell you there is no good or bad, there just is, and you determine those things that are good or bad. Well, what's the ego like to do? Focus on the negative. Why? Because it feels like if I can overcome the negative, everything will be positive. But it's actually a paradox. The more you focus on the negative, the more you actually bring it in. Then you have the spirit, the soul, what you are, consciousness. And that's the observer. Now, for me, what happens is how I understand it is when you get in that flow state, you are allowing that person, that being that is you, which is consciousness, to have the experience. And when you do that, it's almost like mind quiets, body aligns. It allows you to do things that most people don't think they're capable of doing. But because you are connected to your soul and you are embodied as the being that you are, you have the rules apply a little differently. So, quick example of how they apply differently: time doesn't exist, not in the same way. You see, have you ever been at a time where you've sat with someone, maybe you've been on a date, and you're having a long conversation, and you look down at the clock and you've been there for 4 hours, but it seemed like 5 minutes? That's the flow state. Works both ways. Also works in, and I've used sports in the past, where you need more time to do certain things, but you only have a minute amount of time to complete the things. For instance, in sports, you have to process everything around you in order to take an action, but you only have, say, 2 seconds to have that action occur. But what actually is occurring is, it's like time slows down. That 2 seconds suddenly feels like 10 seconds or 15 seconds or 30 seconds, or like that time doesn't even exist. And you have all the time that you need in that moment to do what you are here to do, or what you were meant to do in that moment. That is the flow state. Again, the flow state, it doesn't exist within space-time. And even if it did, what's happening is your consciousness, your soul, which does not exist in space-time, it is eternal, so it is exterior to space-time. It allows that moment of flow to be brought into space-time. Hopefully that makes sense to you. So that's kind of a brief description of the flow state and how it works. But what say you? Have you experienced the flow state? Have you experienced it in the same manner or in a different way? As always, if you enjoy this content, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm truly grateful. And until I talk to you again, peace, love, light, and I hope you have the most amazing day.